My stepdaughter's ex-boyfriend is at her apartment and will not leave. He is not on the lease. She moved all the way out here to get away from me. Yeah, he's threatening in front of the kids.
It was a chilling warning. It came just 2 days before Donald Bryant would fatally shoot his ex-fiancée Heaven Glisson and an innocent bystander, plunging a quiet Kentucky apartment complex into utter chaos. From a SWAT standoff to gunfire in the woods, we are retracing the steps that led from that first desperate 911 call, and with the insight of a retired detective commander, we are asking the question, could this tragedy have been prevented? Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Late on a Sunday night in Independence, Kentucky, police raced to the Taylor Ridge apartment complex after neighbors reported gunfire. But by the time it was over, 3 people were dead, and this included a young mother and a man who appeared to just be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But here is the really chilling part about this. 2 days earlier, 2 days before this, a 911 call had already hinted at what was coming. On the recording, a relative's voice can be heard telling dispatchers,
My stepdaughter's ex-boyfriend is at her apartment and will not leave. He is not on the lease. She moved all the way out here to get away from me. Yeah, he's threatening in front of the kids.
And you know what? That call was just one red flag. Because just hours before the victim's death, a family member says that that same ex sent her a text message that read something along the lines of hoping she was ready to have some fun tonight. So how did it go from there, right? To SWAT teams, to drones, to gunshots in the woods, and now you're left with family, friends, a community left shaken. Well, we got to rewind. This case takes us back to September 19th, and it involves 24-year-old Heaven Glisson, a mother of 2 who, according to her family, was trying to start fresh. She had recently broken off her engagement with 34-year-old Donald Bryant, the father of her youngest child. And although they shared a child together, Glisson had confided in her family that she was afraid of Bryant. And according to police, she moved into the Taylor Ridge apartment complex in Independence to get away from him, to get distance from him. But police say she was only living there for 2 weeks before Bryant actually showed up at her door and everything unraveled. And we're going to get to that. But first, this trouble started that Friday night when Glisson and her family called the police. And the dispatcher answered, and the tension is plain in this recording. You can hear it.
Yeah, he followed me out to the parking lot while I was trying to leave and was trying to get my phone, and he grabbed it out of my pocket, and then he took off back in the house.
So Independence police arrive, and Captain Mike Brock later described the situation as a, quote, emotional crisis. Now, Bryant was still there on scene, apparently acted cooperative, and ended up leaving without further incident. There was no arrest. But to Glisson's family, the danger hadn't gone with him. 2 nights later, at 11:20 p.m., officers were dispatched back to Taylor Ridge. This time, it wasn't a call about threats.
So you heard arguing? Yeah, and it was a loud noise. It sounded like a gunshot.
A neighbor, Amy Schrei, told Fox 19 that she heard an initial gunshot before going back to bed, only to hear more gunshots ring out. Nest camera footage captures police reacting to the sound of gunfire on the property. And police ended up finding this man, 33-year-old Dalen Bradford, outside the complex with a gunshot wound. He was rushed to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center in critical condition. According to Bradford's cousin, he had just gone to his car to get diapers for his baby when he crossed paths with Bryant and Glisson. And he may have stepped in if the two were in some sort of confrontation, according to what Schrei told Fox 19. Though we can't verify for certain that that's what happened. But is this just a case of wrong place, wrong time, absolute tragedy? Yeah, maybe. And after the gunshot, witnesses reported seeing Bryant and Glisson run into this wooded area behind the apartments. Officers formed a perimeter. They called in drones. They called in K-9 units. They called in SWAT. The hours ticked by, and then sometime after 1 a.m., police heard multiple gunshots coming from inside the woods. And by 3 a.m., K-9 teams located 2 bodies, Glisson and Bryant. Both had been fatally shot, and police later confirmed that Bryant's wound was self-inflicted. And even more tragically, by the way, as investigators processed this scene in the woods, there was bad news that came from the hospital a day later on September 22nd. Bradford, who had been fighting for his life, died from his injuries. To Glisson's family, the events felt like a grim outcome that they had feared, right? Christina Cochran, the grandmother of Glisson's oldest child, told Fox 19 that Glisson, who was once engaged to Bryant, believed he was in fact the one, telling reporters she thought she found the one. In her mind, he was like a knight in shining armor to her rescue. But she also said that Glisson would confide in her that Bryant was abusive towards her. Court records reviewed by the outlet confirm that Bryant even had a prior assault charge. But you know what is even more eerie about all of this is that according to Cochran, Bryant had apparently sent Glisson a chilling last message that reportedly said something along the lines of, "I hope you're ready to have fun tonight," referring to September 19th. Now, you might think by watching Sidebar, you've seen everything. I will tell you, think again. 50 Ways to Catch a Killer. This brings you real cases where detectives had to flip the script to take down cold-blooded killers. Hosted by 50 Cent, this isn't your typical crime show, okay? It's a high-stakes, twist-filled ride into the minds of investigators who think outside the badge to break the case. From unforgettable setups to shocking reveals, every episode proves when killers think they got away with murder, think again. Watch 50 Ways to Catch a Killer with 50 Cent exclusively on Fox Nation. Now there are still some unanswered questions that remain in this case, and I want to talk about those. I want to bring on retired investigator Will Svilar to talk more about this. Will, thank you so much for coming on. It's a really, really problematic and distressing case, to say the least. But when you hear a 911 call days before this shooting, what should law enforcement be looking out for as red flags?
Well, this story that we're going to talk about today, it is age old. I have seen so many of them, and it just keeps repeating. The cycle of domestic violence just keeps repeating. When you get a call like that, you nowadays you get a dispatcher that'll tell you, listen, this is our fourth call there, or our third call there, in our jurisdiction anyway, in Chicago. And then they'll ask if there's a CCL holder there. So you'll get some information going into it. But those are the things you have to look for. You have to look for, and when you get onto the scene, you have to look at the, alleged offender and the victim and see if you notice any actual physical signs of abuse. A lot of the things we run into is the fact that victims of domestic violence are afraid to go forward. They're afraid to press charges. In virtually every state now, if you as a police officer witness any type of injury on that person, regardless if they want to press charges, the offender has to go. So these are all things that you have to look for. Also the demeanors. Demeanors of the offender, demeanors of the victim. Many, many times you'll get to a scene and the demeanor of the offender will be incredulous, like, I don't even know why I'm here. Why you're here. I wasn't really doing anything. So you got to look for that. You got to see if there's any other witnesses to what's been going on.
And I want to be clear about what can be expected. What's a realistic expectation of a response versus, what's not. And when you look at that first call, should that first call have triggered a different type of response? Could there have been a mental health intervention? Could there have been a domestic violence specialist who's brought on board? What do you take away?
Again, like I said, it depends on the history at that house. I mean, every domestic violence call that we go to in Chicago, we have a domestic violence form. Whether or not a person makes a report, whether or not the offender is arrested or on scene or gone, we give them a form that basically says, here's your options for shelters, domestic violence hotline, there's numbers and there's resources. Bare minimum, everybody should be getting that out there to folks.
Independence Police, they describe that initial encounter as a, quote, emotional crisis. And they let the suspect go. They let the suspect leave after he was cooperative. From your perspective, is that the right call? Look, I know hindsight's 20/20, but given the information at that time, emotional crisis, let him go. Is that the right call?
Whose emotional crisis was it? Was it her emotional crisis or was it his emotional crisis? Or was it a combination of the both? And as law enforcement, we're not social workers. Although we do a lot of social work, we're not social workers. We really don't have the authority to detain that person unless we have probable cause for an arrest. So we could try to reason with the person to ask him if he wants to go into a facility or he wants to go to a shelter or wants to go to a hospital. We can ask those questions, but we cannot forcibly detain them unless we see evidence of a crime, or we could sign him into a mental health facility if we show signs that he is dangerous. On that first call, I don't know what they saw there, but it sounds like she didn't want to press charges, and he convinced the coppers that he wasn't a problem. And again, you can't blame the victim for this ever.
No.
They're afraid. They have children. They're worried about all kinds of different things. So more than likely, she's under emotional distress. So potentially maybe we could have helped her a little more.
Well, let me ask you this. You mentioned someone accompanying police, like a social worker, a mental health specialist. Is that commonplace? I mean, does that ever happen?
They're trying it in Chicago.
Okay.
Social workers writing out on calls, and this is a situation where I don't even know where I am on this. I get the idea that police officers aren't social workers. I just said it. We're not trained to do that kind of stuff. We talk to a lot of people. We're not really trained to do that. But then again, you bring a social worker out there. What if it escalates into a violent situation? The social worker's not trained to be a police officer. So you worry about the safety of everybody. And in this case, the guy came back a couple days later with a gun. So you worry about. It's a good idea, I think, in theory, but in practice, it's a little more difficult to get it out there.
Wait, how do officers analyze threats in general? Threats to others, threats to themselves? I mean, the person making a threat, threats of self-harm. How do officers assess that?
Well, you assess everything from the minute you get out of that squad, from you take the call, you get the information you get from the caller. When you get to the scene, you're not supposed to park in front of the house. You're supposed to park a little bit down the street so you can have time to assess what you're walking into. So you use your visual skills, you use your experience, and you use the information that was given to you by the dispatcher, and also what you see as you're walking up to the scene.
This is a case that unfortunately we cover a lot of, right? A case involved an ex-partner, reportedly had a history of abuse, prior criminal charge, assault charge here. How often do you see escalation after a breakup in these kinds of cases?
It always escalates. It always escalates until one of two things happens. The victim is separated from the situation. I should say three things. The offender goes to jail, or what we saw that happened in Independence happens. And, you see that one time is too many times. We see it too much. And again, when we talk about orders of protection and protection orders and things like that, when you get an order of protection against somebody, when the judge signs that order of protection and puts it in, he doesn't assign a police officer with you to go with you everywhere you go. So that's where the problem is. If a person is bent on doing bad, if we can't catch him before he does an evil deed, an order of protection is useless.
Yeah. Is there a push? Look, limited resources, limited financial capabilities to make that happen, but has there ever been a push that you've seen to try to add that extra layer of protection for somebody who is the subject of a protective order?
So, and again, here's another thing about protective orders. Unless the person is served and knows, you really can't enforce it. So they have to know that there's a protective order against them. And that could be the first time that they show up. Hey, listen, you can't be here. Here's the order. Or someone can serve them. Again, like you said, depend on the resources and who they have to serve these orders. The extra layer of protection is how many domestic violence calls are we getting? How many people do we have to try to protect? And like you said, there's limited resources. Even in a city as big as Chicago, there's limited resources as to providing that next layer of protection. Again, it's a terrible problem that continues to happen. And boy, I wish I could come up with another layer of protection for these vulnerable people who are victimized by these brutes.
Talking about response, by the way, on the night of this shooting, police deployed drones, they deployed canines, they deployed SWAT. What does that tell you about the seriousness of the threat that they believe they were facing there?
Well, based on the evidence they have a person shot in the parking lot. You have witnesses saying that someone was dragged or escorted, dragged, however you want to say it, into the woods. The woods aren't exactly easy to walk through. You have to get all your resources out there. Someone's dead. Someone's potentially being kidnapped or held against their will. You throw everything you have at that.
And, clearly they did. Unfortunately, you're left with multiple fatalities here. And I will tell you, there's one piece that investigators are still trying to understand, they're still trying to solve this piece of the puzzle, is Bradford's exact role in all this. You know, police confirmed he was a resident at Taylor Ridge, but beyond being in the wrong place at the wrong time, his connection to all this confrontation, it's not clear. So how do police go about exploring that connection, and how much can the actual crime scene tell them about that?
You start out with interviews. You interview residents, people that know them, neighbors, all those things. Is there a romantic relationship? I don't know. It doesn't say so in any of the reports that I read. But there is a witness that was interviewed at the complex that said it looks like he was trying to intervene on what he thought was a kidnapping, and he got killed, or he got shot for it. Video, there's got to be some kind of video somewhere in that parking lot, I would assume. You do your interviews. Where is he in relation to where her apartment is? Is he down in the parking lot? Does he see the offender coming down with the victim? Against her will, try to step up and he gets killed. These are all things that'll be determined through interview and any kind of video evidence that they can find. What's the main takeaway for you from a case like this, a story like this? It's heartbreaking because I've seen it so many times. And you look at, and there's a common denominator on this. They're vulnerable victims. They are financially, not independent, and they have children, little children that they have to take care of. And they're trying to do the best they can to get themselves away from the abusive situation. And this is a young girl that could have stayed in that, for the next 10 or 15 years. But she tried to do the right thing. She tried to separate herself and her kids from that. And, society, law enforcement, we're letting these people down. We have to come up with some kind of a plan, like you said, to add another safety valve to this for these poor people who are just trying to better their lives and not be abused. Yeah, it's incredibly sad because you have this community who is now left grieving a young mother and a man who, by all accounts, was just caught up in what was this deadly, chaotic event. It's senseless. It's so unfortunate. It's a tragedy. And yes, we're asking questions about what more could have been done, if anything. Difficult to say. Will Svilar, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it. My pleasure, Jesse. That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can follow me on X or Instagram. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.